Sanji Shodan Soji Shonam La Shanju Badu Danin Hadub Ji Dagi Zenzo Zibe Sonan Chi Trola Penzi Sanji Duba Shok Simchin Tamche Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Dan Bajo Jing Dunan Dan Dunan Ji Judan Dewa Jojing Dunam Mebe Dewa Da Badam Hidawa Jojing Nering Jeding Neden Dewe Danyon Seme Balane Bajo Shing. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings never be separated from supreme happiness, which is without suffering. May all beings remain in boundless equanimity, free from both attachment to close ones and rejection of others. Arousing bodhicitta, heart-mind of enlightenment, the real sincere, courageous wish that reflecting on this, taking a few moments, becomes perfect conditions for every single being to have immediate happiness and long-lasting freedom. I'm Drakpa. This is a quick kind of reflection on generosity of spirit. Like just the amazing importance and kind of nuance and simplicity of just generosity of spirit. Like this kind of loving, vulnerable, but really strong and clear kind of orientation or a willingness to really be with someone in a way that's helpful. To really like care for a situation, an environment, a time, a mood that's just really like just available. And kind of the reflection is much more about how I think in general from like a Buddhist Bodhisattva approach of like really developing this like vast courageous view to want to keep being again and again available to every single being until all the beings are free of suffering. Like in terms of this Bodhisattva approach, like this willingness to be an atmosphere of kindness, to be a generative field of like loving kindness and creative uplift, generosity of spirit, and how this is much more, as an orientation, it's much more important than being technically correct. To facilitate creative, co-creative, emergent kind of like newness happening right now. Generosity of spirit, to be with someone where they're at, to meet them where they're at. I think this is such a very significant, like ultra important aspect of really taking the Bodhisattva vow, to really want to show up for the happiness and enlightenment of every being, as long as that takes, whatever that takes. It's so important for that to be like a kind of a more lived, embodied, visceral kind of experience, as opposed to just knowing the mechanics of how that might happen. So the leaning into motivation is first really to like not want to be right, but instead to want to be helpful. To want to genuinely like really be helpful for someone. Whatever that takes. A generosity of spirit. And then, I mean, there's so much importance on getting the technical details correct. Like honoring pattern, working with a flowing, dynamical system, like in a way with an integrity that honors the integrity of that system, and that also honors one's own abilities, one's own dispositions and talents and, you know, hang-ups and kind of how much I can be available. Honoring both sides of this. What's the space or the environment I'm in? How much am I available to really participate in it? How much can I flexibly be with someone else? Like this whole universal donor approach. How much can I really like show up for someone else in a way that's helpful or generative, and at least has the motivation to do that? And that's where like emphasizing the motivation at the front, at the outset, seems to be so important, as opposed to what exactly makes that happen. What's the specific modality phase shift that gets that kind of like locks into the attunement that helps like create supportive generative life conditions, so that the natural intelligence, the natural care and concern and comprehensive kind of like embodied immersive intelligence of a being in a world can turn on. It's not so much exactly like creating the owner's manual for that. It's much more about a willingness, an aspiration that like, I want to be helpful. I want to actually, you know, leave an interaction with someone in a way that like the person feels like that was a valuable, impactful, like meaningful experience for them. And that I feel like that was really worthwhile. Like I did my best. It was well-rounded. It was wholehearted. That both, that it's just that like we leave, we come and enter a space, we enter a place, and like, as you know, in this temporarily little fragile and permanent situation we have is like humans and bodies and worlds with others, like it's so impermanent. But then, you know, after the gathering disperses, as the body collapses, as the day comes to a close, like that we can like reflect and feel good about it, like, and that high quality sense of goodness, of communicative reciprocity, of like really co-enactment, of like being a creative field. Like it really begins with this motivational orientation of just, I really want to be helpful. I aspire to actually be helpful. And that means I aspire to actually be flexible and like listen and try to really show up for someone else with where they're at first. I mean, Bodhisattva approach is very much like equalizing is the foundation. Like we're all kind of in the same boat, same world, similar human bodies among humans. There's so much commonality with how our 5 poisons of mental destructive emotions work, and how this Buddha nature we have that's like vastly naturally compassionate and wise. There's just so much commonality. So we're all equal in a lot of ways. And then exchanging, like, what's my happiness compared to the happiness of all beings? Like I'm going to offer my happiness as generative manure, as a support for the happiness of all beings. As only Dalai Lama would say, like he'd visualize himself on one side above him in the space, and then like just stadiums of beings on the other, and would just ask himself, which is more important? And just, it's self-evident, like all beings are more important. And of course, like we're trying to honor both myself and others. But as like a motivational kind of like impulse, we're trying to really be a service to all beings and to the teachings that bring about immediate and long-lasting happiness and freedom. Like that these teachings will sustain, that the Buddha's teaching will like be held with integrity, comprehensively, it'll be intact, like purely held. Meaning it'll have all the elements available for a complete path to liberation or enlightenment. That's upholding. Like this impulse to like, we're all in the same boat. What can I do to really be vastly and profoundly of service, of benefit? And then the third part is like, and others are more important. Like others come first. Like, and how to turn that habit of me always putting myself first, self-absorption, self-preoccupation. Like drive all blames into one. You know, the root of all the suffering I experience is this exaggerated self-importance. Like I always have to come first. I always need to be right. I always get the best. I'm always at the center. It's just so disproportionate to like reality of cause, condition, and effect. I'm a valuable, important part of matrices of infinite others that are also valuable, important, like very special parts. You know, as a part, we're like sharing this living ecology. We're like creating this together. So like the generosity of spirit, to really emphasize that, because I think so oftentimes like a conversation begins with technical details, and then it really quickly is like, this is how I'm right, or this is what's valuable I have to share, and I'm going to prove it to you. And like the end of the conversation is if you agree with how I'm right. And as an overarching strategy for Bodhisattva, that's just kind of breaks the Bodhisattva vow. The end result isn't to be the most important one in the room, the one that's most correct, the one that knows the most. It's not trying to be the galaxy brain person who's like, the smartest dude in the room. It's not an arm wrestle match. This is not like, I'm the biggest worldview holder, This is silly. This is just silly child games. If we really want to take the Bodhisattva view appropriately, like really to heart, and like the way it was taught, appropriate meaning according to how the Buddha taught it, with that much flexibility, that much courage, that much like wide vision, deep, profound, vast vision of time, space, and mind. And this is to, it begins with aspiration, this orientation, the motivation, to generosity of spirit, with like an attunement, with prajna, to like want to show up with careful details. So it starts with like, how are we in this together? What do you have that's valuable to offer? What do I have that's valuable to offer? What are possible ways that we can co-create awesome things? And it's just this deep, rich, nuanced plurality of vision, of enactment, of understanding. And I hesitate to bring up the word, but I also don't, like integral, this integrative mode, to want to bring more things together, or to honor more of the symphony of what is happening that I haven't yet been available for. To hold more, to love more, to flexibly include more, to creatively, clearly, like courageously be able to be with more, to play more games, to love in a greater diversity of ways, to be able to like patiently hold a space for something to like deepen its roots when some things take a long time to deepen their roots, and others are just like these fast growing mushrooms or just little sprouts that just beam up overnight. Like to be that dynamic, as quick as it could be, as fast as it could be, as long as it could be, as slow as it could be, as out of the box as it could be. Like I aspire to be the nutritive, generative, creative field that would allow for everything to flourish. I mean, His Holiness Dalai Lama says it so simply: my religion is kindness. This is such a profound statement, because in the most outermost, exoteric, empirical, literal way, it's like just to be kind, to show up with someone. Then afterwards, they're like, wow, that was just so nice. But this deeper level of kindness too, to actually learn the skills to show up with someone in a generative way where like you like tune into them with so much kind of passionate interest and patience that like you create this like field where it's easier for the connections to happen. It's easier for the aha, vipassana insight to emerge on its own from the being's own side, from their own intelligence, from their own ecology, from their own sense-making, world-making, meaning-making, to be this kind of like supportive field of life conditions, this such deep-level nutrition, this kindness, deep layered kindness. This is the total Bodhisattva approach. And as a Bodhisattva, if words like integral or integrative or holistic or systemic, or if those scare you or trigger you, or somehow like all of a sudden like you kind of get freaked out or easy to kind of shut down or dismiss, kind of casually dismiss, I'm sorry to say, but you're just a fundamentalist. In this case, you're just being narrow-minded, closed-minded fundamentalist. You're totally breaking Bodhisattva vow. I mean, is really a Bodhisattva gonna like just dogmatically refuse to learn French if they're in France? No, the Buddha never taught in French. Why should I teach? Why should I learn French? This is just so blatantly closed-minded. Oh, the Buddha never taught about the periodic table of elements. Why should I learn that? The Buddha never taught about, astrophysics or, cultural studies or anthropology, or like the Buddha never explicitly kind of like, did pick a set of knowledge. Like, I mean, it's true. The Buddha, like before a giant, forest, like bent down and picked up a handful of leaves and said, what I teach is like these leaves in my hand. I teach what's conducive for liberation. What I could teach is like the leaves in the forest. So it's always aligned for liberation, for freedom from suffering and causes of suffering. But we shouldn't get too essential, too extractive either, where it's like, only what's the essential core first principle Buddhist things. That's the only thing I'll ever think about or reflect on or say or repeat or, consider to be true Buddhism. Because Buddha, I mean, how many different jhana vehicles did the Buddha teach? How many different bodies did the Buddha emanate? How many different talents was the Buddha exploring? Like, what are the Bodhisattva Bhumi levels about? They're not about, like, understanding emptiness better. They're about, like, having, like, unblocking or removing, purifying the binding habitual patterns, the karmic patterns, habitual patterns, subtle patterns, the emotive and cognitive obscurations that are closing the aperture of how much emptiness I can be with. Because these habits, like, close down the field of how generous I can be. How kind can I be? How mutually, like, with clarity, uplifting can I be? These bodhisattva levels are purifying or removing, they're releasing and just, like, letting go of these ways that we box things in and we forget that we boxed it, we framed it, we held it, and that was just a temporary holding pattern that we added to reality. And we start releasing. We start, like, okay, I can do English, I can do French, I can do Spanish, I can learn computer languages, there's all these different ways to hold reality. And the question is, what serves? What's helpful? What's the helpful language here? Is it helpful to just shut up and be quiet and, like, bring kind of really clear, loving presence? Is it helpful to go through owner's manual details? Each of us is choosing our own adventure. Am I willing to be that flexible to let other people determine their adventure, their life, their interests, their passions? Am I creative enough to, like, actually play someone else's game? To let them populate the field of the dream for a bit. Like, they get to be stagecraft the play. I'm just going to be a secondary character. How can I help move the plot along so that, there's greater kind of fun and delight and understanding, knowledge, insight? I don't have to have top billing. Just because I like tennis better than pickleball or something doesn't play pickleball. What's the big deal, Like, if your kid believes that one needs Santa Claus, like, but to go full on with the Santa Claus thing. As they change and, change alongside. I mean, to refuse, like, the versatility, the diversity, the deep diversity of ways that we can be with each other just because my way is the right way. It's the logical way, the practical way, the actionable way, the fundable way, the empirically verifiable way, like all that heavy-handed dogmatic fundamentalism amongst Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Your time is at an end. The Buddha never taught any of that stuff. Now 21st century overlap, ontological flood, like that brittle, closed-minded, fractional, fragmented, hyper-combative approach, call it hyper-masculine, call it whatever you want, like that time has come and gone because it's so blatantly immature. It's just so brutally, like, second grade. I mean, it's the time to get, like, mature. It's the time to grow up. It's really the time to, like, be able and willing to play out of my box. Because we have to cooperate to just diagnose what is this moving, living, dynamical system that is needs to be cared for, like an ocean. Or like these complex problems, like pick a war zone. Pick a political theater. I mean, this is complex stuff. We have to cooperate if anything is going to move forward. Forward meaning more generatively, more comprehensively, more outside of just linear forward and backward and like this progress narrative. I mean, just more like in a much more rich, diverse, deep way. Maturity. My religion is kindness. This is talking about becoming a deeply mature individual. I'm here for others. And by genuinely serving the teachings in others, I will come alive. I'll be more participatorily, infused, like, and boosted by the relationships I have and by the, creative things I go through and the losses. I will have dared to love so much that, like, the just heartbreak of it all will wreck my shit. And I'll learn to relax and let it move through me. I'll have that wisdom too. This is generosity of spirit. We can get super technical about all this too. I'm very much interested in simplicity within complexity. I like the complexity part because that's called reality. I like the simplicity part because that's reality too. I need these actionable heuristic rules of thumb to just, like, open the space for myself, to open my mind, open my heart, deepen my gut. Like, I need this, like, wisdom, compassion, dignity, courage, like rooted courage. I need it to be simple and complex at the same time. We can break this down super technically. I love the meta genius Sean Espiner Hargens, like his way to, like, just elegantly weave together so much nuance and diversity of fields of study and research into these very kind of pinpointed insights. Like the who times the how times the what. Who times how times what. Who is the subject, my awareness, epistemology. The how is methodology, injunction, engagement, poised orientation. The what is ontology, being. What world am I in? Who am I with? What is actually the sense making that they have? What is the world we're talking about? Who times how times what? Epistemology with methodology with ontology. Buddhism always has these as, like, this full triad, like subject, object, and interactivity. This is like the three causal spheres. It's called the three spheres. Knowing, epistemology, methodology, injunctive mode, and ontology. And they all are diverse. How many ways can we know things? How many methods can we use? How many worlds can we be in? They're inexhaustible sets, all of them. But in order to be an actual generosity of spirit, we need to locate these three. What's the epistemology? What's the method? What's the ontology? And if we're willing to have a diversity of epistemologies, like, I can know in a lot of ways. Cold data, warm data. Just the facts, just the story, emotive feelings, Method. What's the injunctive? Like quantifiable, qualitative, short-term, medium-term, long-term, meso, micro, macro, like, pick a way to, like, track a pattern. Diversity. Why diversity of patterns? What aspect of space? Which unit? What aspect of time? Which unit? What's the metric? Times world. Beings. The different kinds of beings, the human beings, the animals, if you want to get it really out of the box, the hungry ghosts, the hell beings, the formless beings, longevity, long life god beings, the asuras and rakshasas, and all of it, the nagas and the little germs and the things that live inside of, like, galactically hot volcanoes, and the Buddha taught about all kinds of world systems and beings with entire histories, like the extreme plurality of ontology of worlds. So we have this, like, inexhaustible plurality of knowing, of epistemology, this inexhaustible plurality of method, this inexhaustible plurality of world making, of worlds, of embodiment. Epistemology, methodology, ontology. Are we willing to be in this many worlds? Are we willing to use a diversity of methods? Are we willing to have different ways of knowing? Of being, doing, and becoming? That's called kindness. Generosity of spirit. Like, how flexible are we willing to become to really be helpful? How much does it have to be my world, my method, my way of knowing? Or I have two ways of knowing, and two methods, and two worlds I'm willing to be in. Like, how much are we willing to be inexhaustible? Of this amazing. Like, how much am I willing to entertain the the idea that I might just be this amazing. You might be this awesome. This world might be this creative. This universe we're a part of, it might be this dynamic. Because the Buddha set the bar very high. 9 yana vehicle systems, 4 entire philosophical, like internested systems of ecology, of study and practice. Systems where there's no such thing as a deity, then there's no such thing as a thing, then there's everything outside's deity, then everything inside's deity, then everything that's ever been is deity, like enlightened form. And everything's enlightened sound, and everything's sacred world, enlightened mind. Or, on the outermost, the Buddha didn't teach any of that. For someone who wasn't ready, he said, what do we know? There's suffering. And then later, the second turning, the Buddha said, there is no such thing as suffering. That's just a function of a certain immature kind of small-minded grasping. And then the Buddha said, oh, well, you think there's nothing then? Well, no, there's actually this Buddha nature, this like infinite, inexhaustible wisdom and compassion that's like the heart of every single being and can't be contained in any way with any representational system or any conceptual model. Like this is just breaks, just utterly explodes any conceptual box. And what's that like? When we really flow with it, pure body, pure speech, pure mind. Deity, mantra, dharmakaya. This is all sacred world, all layers, all levels, all lines, all types, all states, all shadows, all polarities. The whole fabric of it all is just enlightened dynamic energy. Like within a field of boundless wisdom awareness. How kind am I willing to be? How many games am I willing to play? How much am I willing to put the time in to learn the games, to learn the languages? To actually patiently, like deeply, be with someone on their terms for as long as it takes. Like how willing am I to really live the Bodhisattva vow? It's not just like some one-day vow, you know? It's not just like, oh, I will love you forever till death do us part, but I'm not really in it to win it because if someone else comes around, like I'm out, you know? This Bodhisattva vow, man, it's so big. It's probably the biggest aspirational kind of framework you can come up with. Because it works with all entities. And it also works with like a mode that's like doesn't believe in entities. It works with suffering, samsara, nirvana. It works beyond, go beyond peace and cessation. I mean, it's just so diversely flexible with like the utter guiding principle to not break any system of cause, condition, and effect. Once a game is set in motion and agreed upon, you have to play fairly in the game. If you believe in space and time, play that game, and you have to play fair. If you don't believe in space and time, play that game, and learn to play fair. Always it has to be kind. Always a generosity of spirit. And if words like Buddhism or integral trigger you, and it shows like a limit of what games you're willing to play, that's fine. But if we start to like, thump our books, and like get all like up in arms about like how what's pure and what's real and original and the only way and the true way and like show me the empirical facts or show me the visceral authentic feelings, we lock into our mode and say, no, my world, my method, my way of knowing. We just like are just showing to everyone like what are the fundamentalist grooves of like our own hearts and minds. And we all do that. Every being's doing that. Even the bodhisattvas are doing that. They still have these karmic obscurations, habitual obscurations, emotive, emotional and cognitive like limits that aren't really real. They're just temporary advantageous limits that are being held onto as if they're like fundamental patterns of reality, these set cosmic grooves or whatever you want to call them. But they're not set. They're just habitual. They're just repeated. So that my mind kind of like only courses along this line because I've just repeated that pattern so much. But it's just a function of my own mind, like repeating a certain story. The story's not written in any law of like fabric of reality. E equals MC squared. That's just a function of this region of the universe. I mean, isn't it? At least we need to be able to attain the open-mindedness of like, maybe all these things that we're coming to as these bedrock universal principles. Whenever we think universal in all cases, in all contexts, we need to really like put the brakes on. Make sure our system includes some brakes. some pause, some generative holding patterns, like awareness holding patterns, some Vijayadhara kind of energy. To be like, maybe this isn't as like a true in all cases as I wish it was, so that I could feel safe. Maybe really there's no fundamental edge, like fixed definitive fundamental edge to any box. Maybe it's actually emptiness. Maybe there isn't a fixed ground. Maybe there isn't a final boundary. No boundary, right? There's just infinite temporary boundaries, infinite temporary games. And I have to be willing to play with those games infallibly, to learn how to do that, play with cause, condition, and effect infallibly, so that I can be a more generative field, depending on what games are in play. And I can go, play, learn, grieve, celebrate, and then the game changes, the language changes, the situation changes, climate changes, stories change, feelings change, animals change, people change. We're all going to go. Our bodies are going to change, and the worlds we're in are going to change, and all of it. Conceptual modeling definitely is going to change. Can I be that kind, that caring, that bold and brave? Can I really take the Bodhisattva vow seriously? And that it just requires ordeal. It's challenging to really come up against the grain of my own fundamentalism and have to like acknowledge that. Like, here's a rigid, inflexible aspect of what I'm willing to entertain. Why? I'm just being a punk. I'm just scared. I'm literally just, I'm the ordeal of like losing control, you know? What happens if I don't hold this in place? Am I going to die? Is everyone going to make fun of me? I mean, what happens when the ego actually loses, control? It's a very visceral, embodied process. It's why so many people don't do meditative transformative practice. It's very much like the ordeal of dying. You have to die to these frames as if they're fundamentally fixed in, given reality grooves. They're not. They're just usual for me. And that is a very, this is not level of talking. This is like a visceral, ongoing experience of dying. And like, what's the benefit? What's the reward? The takeaway? The highlight is I get to be more kind, more creative, more flexible, more free-flowing, more mutually generative, more diverse, more chill in a variety of situations, more of a universal donor. And in the end, without just giving away all my energy and resources and just always feeling drained, like having mutual boundary respect, where it's like mutually boosting, mutually uplifting. That's just called mature integral. Another for the Buddhists, sorry, it's just called mature bodhisattva. You're actually in emptiness. You're not just talking about emptiness. You're actually in that world space, second turning, and then you allow the Buddha nature to third turning kind of reveal. Or for integralists, it's not just mapping and who can juggle the most concepts simultaneously and create a modeling system that they can create as a startup and get some money, it's not. This is not just who's proving that they can track is the most meta data. Computers already beat us at that. These algorithms already beat us at that. Now we're humans, usually dudes, trying to fight each other to show how many meta things I can hold with such elegance so that almost no one understands what the hell I'm talking about when I say something. I mean, it's just give me a break, What about the simplicity part, the elegance part, the beauty of it? What about, the day comes to an end and we reflect and it's man, that was just so nice. That was such a enriching, rewarding time. I just got to be around some friends, some old friends, some of my wife's old friends, that some of which she hadn't shared time with them in 25 years. And it was just one of the most generative, uplifting, just lovely, creative, full-bodied experiences I've had, and some of the most dense time I've experienced, and the most hyper-compressed richness in 2 days of how lovely it was. And it's gone now, and it's in me now, and it is me now, and it's also just memoryscape, But wow, generosity of spirit, genuine interest and longing to like connect and be with others where they're at, and to weave in the history, but like, have it be present tense. Like, what's up with you now? What are the fears and troubles? Like, what are you celebrating? Like, what is totally just weird for you? Or like, where do you close? Like, and let's play and dance and have fun and drink and eat and, enjoy things and like, share things that are really vulnerable. And like 2 days later, man, I'm sorry. 2 days later, how wonderful. What deep friendship can happen in a couple days? Like, how much connection like can really happen in a moment? Go into a room with the actual Bodhisattva. 5 minutes later, you come away feeling that was one of the most significant, 5 minutes of your life. Why? Because the generosity of spirit, the deep layered kindness, they're just fully tuning in, fully showing up and saying, that's beautiful, and there's so much more there that you have. And these are the ways that you're holding yourself. So just relax this a little bit. Include a little bit more of what you are. Include a little bit more of what you're a part of. Like, let yourself trust that much. Let yourself like respect yourself that much. Like, you have so much beauty, so much intelligence, so much truth and creative like vigor to like share and enjoy and just relax through and love with. And 5 minutes later, it's like, person didn't say almost anything, but that was the most seen I've ever felt. That was the most honored I've ever felt. Be around a bodhisattva, a genuine bodhisattva, as opposed to like, just infinite, like all the internet conflicts, or just the like, who's this competition for who's the smartest person in the room, all that stuff, immature stuff. This maturing integral, an actual like Bhumi Bodhisattva level. I'm not saying mature integral, which is the same. Bhumi Bodhisattva are so far beyond any of these integral frameworks. It's like way post-integral. I mean, in my very limited sense, but it's like very clearly. Overshooting for turquoise, for mature integral, where you actually are trying to honor all of the spiral. You're not trying to like get everyone into your little zone of your cosmic address, your little one way of making sense of a world. Like, you're actually co-creatively like aligning epistemologies and ontologies and methodologies like as they're dynamically moving and shifting and changing each other. You're really integrating in real time the maps and the models and the bodies and the dynamics. Like, you're really full spiral including. This is a mature integral. This is like turquoise, not just mapping, not just safety mapping. You're not just like designing a program in your basement so to see how it runs in the real world when you get some funding. This is like you're risking something. You're like going out in the world with people and seeing what happens in this emergent way when you don't know what they're going to say or they're going to do. You don't know how you're going to fill the time and the space. It's not in your control. This is just talking about maturity, the deep, profound maturity of being kind. How deep that actually goes. The simplicity of complexity, of actually being that kind, that generous. There's a reason this generosity is like the first paramita practice of the Bodhisattva. To obviously give supportive, material uplift, security, safety. And to give your own things that like, I feel already whole enough, like good enough. I'm going to give you this special, valuable, awesome thing I have too. Like, I already got that. I feel this rich. You can have this awesome thing of mine too. And to, be generous with the Dharma, with knowledge that like temporarily will benefit, more worldly knowledge and also liberative knowledge that'll actually really help us to be this flexible, this dynamic, to live like a maturity of an integral impulse, where we can really honor relative and absolute in dynamic union. Like, it's just a natural elegance, like just this very simple, self-evident elegance, simplicity within complexity. So I invite myself again and again to try to really, re-allow for this simplicity within complexity, this generosity of spirit, as a foundation to these other paramita practices of morality and patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom, as foundational for the Vijaydhara knowledge awareness holder levels, as foundation for all the Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana, way out of the box embodied like sacred worlding practices and living experiences. Like I invite myself to that, and I like invite you to that, and I like really wish like if anything here was like supportive nutrition, like please like enjoy it. And there will be times, and there already are beings who've like they've really given us the owner's manual for how to actually create like very specifically, very precisely, very accurately like life conditions that move from phase to phase, from pre-modern to modern to postmodern to post-postmodern, from one bhumi to the next, from one Vijaydhara state to the next. How do you move between the 5 Dhyani Buddha systems? Like, how do they co-creatively engage? How do the 5 wisdoms become 25 wisdoms? Like, the Buddha taught this stuff extensively in these Abhidharma teachings and Vinaya and Sutra. And most of the time we start to hear a long list of 20 points and we fall asleep, We just want the 1 point because we're available for the simplicity side and not the complexity side. But we need to learn both. So that like in this situation, I can tune in to this ontology, this epistemology, this method of this meaning making, of this exact worlding right now, and use point 8. Because I like did the robust full spectrum approach, but I don't have to go through the full spectrum approach every time. I know how to hone in and tune and align, and I just pick the one thread that like compresses all the universe into that single point. Pith instruction. And then I can like release, and the whole universe repopulates into this detailed, dynamic, full, like infinite symphony. And then it again distills into this elegant, simple, perfectly attuned moment of now with you, with me. So, all love, friends. Hopefully it's helpful. If there anything that was helpful, please. If not, I'm sorry. Apologize, I'm making mistakes. But anyway, we'll dedicate the merit if there's any benefit for the happiness and enlightenment of all beings. By this merit may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it may it be generated. And those who have it may it never diminish, but always continue increasing. Deity, mantra, and dharmakaya are the nature of appearance, sound, and awareness, the pervasive kaya and wisdom display of the Buddhas. May practitioners of the profound and secret great perfection remain inseparable from the innermost, one-taste awareness of wisdom mind. Love ya. Thanks, friends. All good things.